Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings, and so we're on book 3 of the Valdemar, Founding of Valdemar trilogy possible series. I don't know, because Mercedes Lackey has shifted away from unending trilogies in this series for a while now, so I'm not really sure where that stands. But anyways, Founding of Valdemar. I did the first book, and then I never got around to doing the second for this channel, because I was doing other things on this channel when I got around to reading the second book, and I just sort of let it slip my mind, but I had just read that this week, and I hadn't finished reading the book I was supposed to read for this week, and also I just wasn't really feeling like reading the book I'd planned to read this week. You know how it is. Sometimes there are things and plans, and they don't happen because you wanted to do other things. Notice I call this a thing about rambling, and I ramble. So anyways, that's why we're here today. And at some point, I'll probably get around to rereading book 2 and putting it up here and slapping it artificially in place and before this one in the order of the playlist, assuming anybody actually accesses my playlists. So, The Founding of Valdemar, book 3. Book 1 was basically Baron Valdemar, first Duke, and then during the course of it he gets demoted to Baron because the Emperor of the Eastern Empire is a bad man. I guess apparently most of them were. Anyways, he gets demoted, but the thing is, there had been a plan in the works for a very long time, precisely because most of the emperors of the Eastern Empire had been bad people, and the empire as a whole was kind of a bad institution, so Valdemar had figured he would, his great-grandfather, I think it was, had figured he'd get everybody out, and so they'd been planning for literally generations to move basically his people out. So the end of that first book was them getting out and landing in this new place, umpty squillion miles away from where they had been, far enough away that the Empire probably wouldn't be able to track and follow them. Also, he had accidentally caused the complete destruction of the capital, turning it into a giant lava field, so yeah, the entire Empire was going to be kind of discommoded for a while. Anyways, book 2 was them basically trekking through wild areas of what, by the time of the first books of the Valdemar series, that is, when we get to Arrows, which is, I believe, some 1,000 years or so after this, but at the time of the Arrows trilogy, that was all calm, settled, regular land. But at the time of this book, it's still Peligir Forest. That is, it is still suffering from the after effects of the first set of mage storms that had ended the Mage Wars several hundred, however many, maybe 1,000 years earlier. I don't recall offhand what the timeline is. I don't have it in front of me. That would require me to have remembered that and then have gotten one of my books that has the timeline in it, which, frankly, I have a book with the timeline in it that's in my bookshelf staring at me right now. But anyways, neither here nor there. The point is, it's still got, like, forests that come to life and eat animals. It's still got giant, terrifying spiders. It's still got weird mutant animals. It, of course, has Wyrsa, because Wyrsa are, like, everywhere. You know, the sort of lizard, wolf, magic-eating killer things that are just, like, the most terrifying animals ever. There's basically, it puts Jurassic Park's raptors to shame. It's really just horrifying. Anyways, so they have to trek across all of that land in the second book. At the end of it, they finally land up at a place that has been semi-pacified by Teledras, who have, been doing what Teledras do, which is pacifying these regions, because that was the thing that the goddess Kalanel set them to do when they made their deal for, surviving in the aftermath. Anyways, so the Teledris help them get settled. This book picks up after that. They've been there. This is literally jumping ahead 10 years from the last book. They landed where they were. They've gotten settled in place. They now have, you know, a city. They have farms starting to outreach. They have, you know, some people in more distant settlements. They're really, really starting to, you know, form a place, a territory. And Valdemar, Cordus, Baron Cordus Valdemar, he's, you know, arranged for, he's been, of course, running things, and he's set up his administration, he's done all of this, and basically what we're getting is the 10 years later, and we sort of see how they've settled in, how they've started out the way the way Cordus intends to go on, but and they have a face-off with a person who she's a former Teledris, and if you have read the Mage Storm's trilogy, if you have read those books with Andesha in them, with him talking about Ma'ar and how Ma'ar had managed to reincarnate himself generation after generation, you realize that's what this is. This woman, this young woman who had been Teledris, who had been apprenticed to one of their good Teledris friends, she that if you know how it worked, if you know what we had heard, what we read from Andesha, you will understand she got possessed by Ma'ar. It's why she had been trying out a fire spell, which we know is what Ma'ar used to sort of trigger his attack on any adept caliber, you know, great descendants of his, and woke up as him, murdered like all of the fledgling bond birds, and then took off into parts unknown, and decided to start up a small petty kingdom, and had intended to attack and take over, possibly destroy Valdemar. And they managed to beat Ma'ar in no small part because, of course, it had been, you know, that they were able to take advantage of a great many limitations on Ma'ar's part, on, well, Cloudwind's part? I think it was Cloudwind. I don't recall. Cloud something. Her name was Cloud something. Anyways, they managed to defeat her, though none of them, of course, realized that it was a reincarnation of the evilest man who ever eviled, because, well, let's be honest, why would they? But after all of this, Valdemar realizes that he won't live forever, that he knows his sons will be good, decent people, but the fact is, this is the thing that happens with monarchies. You have one good king, and his heir may be a good king, but you cannot promise that in perpetuity. In point of fact, you know, all it takes is one heir who's a good person, who's a bad judge of character, and everything can fall apart in the next generation. And so he wants to apply to, you know, he wants to figure out how to make sure that everything will be okay. And one of the most interesting things is, as described in the books, the history books within the context of the Valdemar series, it's described as King Valdemar having cast some kind of complicated, difficult magic spell, and that his son and his best friend had all been helping him cast it, and they had done stuff and called upon a large list of gods enumerated in their histories. And while it is implied that maybe he was listing off gods at one point that he just named every single god he could think of, asking, somebody, please, anybody, give me a help to make sure that this country continues in the way in which I want it to continue. Live up to the potential I want it to have. It is not a complex spell. It is, in fact, it almost feels like a moment of inspiration brought on by the fact that it seemed like the gods had deliberately chosen to interfere. That when Cloud What's-Her-Noodle, whose name I can't remember, the one who was Mar reincarnated, even though they don't know that, and we won't know that unless we've read Mage Storms, which, you should probably read Mage Storms before reading this book, because it gives you a whole subtext there. The genuine understanding of what the subtext is, although, I mean, if you've listened to this, then you already know what the subtext is, but, this is an all spoilers zone, so, it's too late for anybody who's listening to this who hasn't read the books, right? But the thing is that Ma'ar had attacked them, or rather Ma'ar's descendant as being possessed by Ma'ar, and had launched a massive magical attack at them, and rather than letting it kill them, that there had been literal, actual divine intervention, which does periodically happen in these books, and that specific divine intervention had basically picked up the magic spell and that had been lobbed at them and repurposed it into a magic circle, the thing that eventually became the grove that the so-called Grove-born companions come out of, and, it's a holy place, not consecrated to any particular power, just, sort of like neutral holy ground. And so Valdemar steps into that, and basically he starts speechifying, and he has sort of a preset speech, kind of. He's been thinking about it, but he also clearly is improvising and going a little bit off the rails, and basically just begging for something that will help. And he gets it in the form of the companions, which were, magic horses that have been sent down from the high powers above to basically provide a certain amount of physical support, a certain amount of magical support, and a certain amount of understanding of human foibles and peccadillos and personalities, so as to ensure that the king and his subjects would always, or a monarch and their subjects would always have these there to make sure that the administration was ultimately being run by people with the best intentions, hopefully competent, but certainly with the best intentions. And so they step out and wind up choosing people. It'll be interesting to see if there's a fourth book about settling into at least some of the formal roles that we know later, whether it's the establishment of the Heraldic Collegium, the establishment of the king's own, of the monarch's own position and companion. There's stuff in the fourth book, but the one thing I'm disappointed in this book is that I had been desperately hoping for a deeply amusing moment of, I have poured my heart and soul into this, and you sent me a horse. Just that split second, the horse steps out of the grove, and he looks and he's like, you sent me a horse? I have horses. And then you get the divine ecstasy of being chosen by a divine being for, reasons and stuff, but I'd been hoping for that comedic moment. I didn't get it, and that's fine. It's not really an angle that I would have expected Mercedes Lackey to take, but I lived in hope. Anyway, so, yeah, this is fun. It's good. It's a solid point of establishment for, the nation that we wind up meeting in, previous books, future incident. And, yeah, so highly recommend it if you like this series. And that's everything. So I'll see you all next week.